All right, great. Well, it is 7 o'clock, and in the interest of time and knowing that we're all here to learn a great deal this evening, we'll go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Josh Lefebvre. I'm the Director of Graduate Business Programs in the Ray School of Business at Clarkson, and we're just very happy to have you all here for Supply Chain Disruptions, Lessons Learned from the COVID-19 Pandemic with our colleague, Dr. Farzad Mahmoudi. So thank you for joining us. We've had overwhelming response on RSVPs, over 200 RSVPs. So I see we're already jumping well over 50, and we're very excited to have you all here. It's a very timely topic, and while the original intent was to share information of our faculty's expertise in research and the things that they'll learn in our MS and supply chain program, it quickly became known to us that we had interest from literally every stakeholder groups that we have out there. But it seems like we have three main groups tonight with us: our alumni of our supply chain programs and those professionals also working in the field, our prospective students, and our colleagues and friends of the Ray School of Business. And we're just excited to have you all here, and thank you very much for joining us. I wanted to do a quick housekeeping thing before we get started. A quick reminder that we will be taking questions in the order they're received. So if you can use the chat function by navigating down on your icons at the bottom of your Zoom, you should see the chat box, and you can type in questions there, and we'll certainly go back and answer them as many as we can with the time that we have. Given the anticipated volume this evening, we have decided to not elect unmuting options. So I do apologize for those that would love to ask your questions live, but we certainly will address them as fast as we can in the chat. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce Dr. Mahmoudi, and I'll let him take it from there, and we'll be back in touch at the end to answer any questions that you have. But it was with great respect and privilege for me to introduce to you Dr. Farzad Mahmoudi, who is our Joel Goldschein Endowed Chair Professor in Supply Chain Management. He is also the director of Clarkson's Global Supply Chain Management Program. This program has been ranked as one of the top 20 supply chain management programs in the nation by U.S. News and World Report for 17 years. Dr. Mahmoudi's research interests are in supply chain systems design and management, and systems modeling and simulation. He has published more than 90 articles in a variety of journals and conference proceedings, and he serves on the editorial boards of the International Journal of Industrial Engineering and International Journal of Integrated Supply Management. Finally, Dr. Mahmoudi has been recognized over the years with research, teaching, and service awards. Dr. Mahmoudi, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and knowledge this evening, and I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Josh. I am very excited and happy to be here. As you mentioned, the intention was for this to provide some information for the prospective students interested in MS in supply chain management, the program that we've just started. But then, of course, it was sent to alumni and faculty and staff and all that. And of course, that's great. I just want to kind of say that ahead of time. It is not going to be a research talk, although those colleagues of mine who are attending, I will have just a few comments about I think a very important area of research in this field, but most of the focus is going to be on the practical applications, and so very much addressed to our alumni who are in the front lines doing all this work. At the same time, I will make some comments about our courses at the end a little bit. So I just have one slide in the beginning and one at the end that would kind of help guide our prospective students in this. So my first slide is just kind of going over the program real quick. And I think most of our alums would also like to maybe know about this program because it's a new one. So basically it's a online program can be completed in 1 to 2 years. We follow the systems approach to supply chain management, something that we've done in our undergraduate program very successfully. I will explain that a little bit more as we go on. There's no prereqs as far as the coursework goes. There's no residential component. However, we do have weekly interactive live sessions in every single course. And we just had a meeting about that. And we like to keep those sessions small, intimate, and very interactive to add a lot of value. And that's going to be in every single course that folks in this program would take. As Josh mentioned, the program was developed and is going to be taught by faculty who have been recognized as a top 20 program in the nation by US News and World Report for 17 years. And it's the first online MS program in supply chain management in New York State. So just so that we don't lose our prospective students, I just want to make sure that I mention ahead of time that there's going to be some terms, some processes, some supply chain specific basically terms that I may refer to. And if you're not in supply chain, you're not gonna know what that is. But at the end, I have a slide that would kind of explain which courses you would be introduced to those. So don't feel bad if I go too fast over a topic, because once you take the classes, those are all going to be very clear. Having said that, our outline, I wanted to start with some examples of supply chain disruptions, mitigation strategies and contingency planning. Those of you who are working in this field know what those are, but I briefly will go over that. Explaining why supply chains are more vulnerable than ever, and what is unusual about the COVID-19 supply chain disruptions, or the ones that have been caused by COVID-19. And of course, we found that our supply chains are not resilient, meaning that it's going to take a long time until they go to their original state before that disruption happened. So they've been basically slow to recover. There is a nice model I found I wanted to share with you that focuses on appropriately resilient supply chains, because at the end of the day, it's a matter of, cost. You don't want to be too resilient for every single product because it's going to be costly. So it's basically a trade-off. And then recommended strategies to mitigate supply chain disruptions. This work has been done by a few of my colleagues, Luciana, who's now at University of New Hampshire, but I know she's in the audience. I just saw her. She's one of the co-authors on this, and so is an emergency doctor. Again, I will introduce them to you, but I just wanted to kind of put the plug. And of course, Diego Nocetti is also a co-author. So we came up with some recommended strategies to mitigate supply chain disruption. And then we talk about some key lessons. Obviously, I always have some recommended readings and selected references. And I just have one slide about MS in Supply Chain Management Program that I'm going to relate 4 courses to basically what you're going to see tonight. First comment is, are these disruptions common? And I would say yes. We have natural disasters, we have acts of war or terrorism, there is IT outages, supplier failures, labor disputes, cyber attacks, data breaches, change in trade policies and tariffs, and so on and so forth. So all of these could cause a supply chain disruption. So I would say it's pretty common. And actually, I found a nice survey on this done on 2018, 2019, which indicated that about half of the firms have experienced significant supply chain disruptions. And it was interesting to see the five most common sources where, and now of course these are before COVID, IT outages, adverse weather, cyber attacks and data breaches. The fourth one I wouldn't have guessed, loss of talent and skills, mentioned as a supply chain disruption, and transport network. So it's the type of thing that a lot of companies have to deal with. Another interesting point is, as you know, those of you who have been taking our courses, one of our key terms is one size does not fit all, and it certainly applies here. So not all industries are going to have to deal with this the same way, and not all industries are at the same risk level either. So for example, the most frequent disruptions, according to this survey, was at oil, gas companies, and automotive. Now, on the automotive one, I can explain probably that why in the next slide, because they tend to have many suppliers and so on and so forth. The longest recovery time, though, has been shown to be in electronics and aerospace industries. And I would say the reason for that is probably because there's a lot of complications there. Going to the complexity of supply chain and focusing on how many suppliers are we talking about, because there's going to be some recommendations about like mapping your supply network and all that, and of course that's easy to say, but I just wanted to kind of see you the magnitude of the work here. So for example, auto manufacturers, on average, they have 250 tier 1 suppliers. Those are the ones that they directly deal with, but 18,000 across all tiers. In aerospace manufacturers, the average of 200 tier 1 suppliers, 12,000 across all tiers. And technology firms, average of 125 tier 1 suppliers and 7,000 across all tiers. So, some of the recommendations, for example, is going to have to do with, map your supply chain, know where your tier 1, tier 2 suppliers are at least, and, where the flow goes and where the bottlenecks are and so on and so forth. But you can see that that's a very big job, essentially, because of the numbers. Now, of course, these are among the highest, but you're talking about thousands across all tiers for most companies. So earlier, I said if you're familiar with this area, you know that there is mitigation strategies and there is contingency plans. So the simplest way to talk about that is, if we are doing things to mitigate like the disruption from happening. So these are essentially actions taken in advance of the disruption, regardless of whether a disruption occurs. These are called mitigation strategies. I provide you two examples. Hershey company, the chocolate maker, it keeps 6-month inventory of milk chocolates in a refrigerated warehouse. Why? So basically they're keeping safety stocks just in case there is going to be a disruption. Is that going to be costly? Obviously, they're carrying that inventory and they may be risk that they may become spoiled, or there's theft, there is obsolescence, and so on and so forth. Medtronic opened the second distribution center, we call them DCs, of course, in Europe after a risk assessment. So they thought they should have another, they shouldn't be so centralized, for example. So those are the types of strategies that companies could take before a disruption could occur. Now, once it occurs, they have contingency plans. So for example, one example would be Walmart. Each Walmart distribution center has 2 or 3 nearby distribution centers that are designed as backup distribution centers in case the first one goes down. Another example would be Cisco. Cisco considers both dual sourcing and qualification of alternative suppliers. So if they're single source, they're gonna try to find another source, or they're gonna do, have 2 suppliers for maybe critical products, and also they're gonna maybe qualify a third one and put that in their back pocket in case there is a need for that. Okay, so just a plug here also for our Global Supply Chain Management Executive Seminar. So I took this slide actually from session 11 of that seminar in 2019, and it was done by Professor Yu and Wasserman. Okay, and of course I modified it, but we do have executive seminars that we've done every year for the last, I think, 19 years, and some of those folks may actually be in this seminar. A lot of them are alumni who are trying to freshen up on skills. I know Bill Williams is here, and he's our alumni, and he's also a top executive, and he's been very helpful to us supplying some of these participants to us, and so on and so forth. So the reason I'm saying that is just that I want you to know there is a community, and for those prospective students, that's very important, because we teach what we feel industry needs. We are in close touch with them, and of course get ideas from them as well, and bring those into our courses. And so it's a kind of a two-way street going back and forth. And of course, they are the ones who are going to hire you for internships and full-time jobs and so on and so forth. One of the things that stands out is supply chains are more vulnerable than ever. And if you ask me why, I would say because we've had so much focus on efficiency, and efficiency introduces risk. So for example, we've done more outsourcing. We've done it at on a global basis. So we got suppliers all over the globe, rather than, companies right across from us or in the same region, and so on and so forth. So that has brought complexity and interdependency in the supply base. Also, there has been attempts to reduce number of suppliers. So we call that supply consolidations. There has been a lot of focus on risk pooling. It's something that we teach in our courses. So again, our prospective students should just bear with me. Essentially think about that as centralization of warehouses, for example. That would be a form of risk pooling, which focuses on efficiency to try to reduce costs and so on and so forth, reduce carrying inventory and so on and so forth. And of course, lots of focus on lean and just-in-time systems. So we don't carry as much inventory and so on and so forth. And therefore, we are more at risk. Now, the question is, what is what is new about the COVID-19 disruption? Now, some people have called that mega, basically, disruptions. I've heard terms like, complex supply chain management or extreme supply chain management, so on and so forth. Now, the reason for that is the length is obviously a lot longer. So think about a hurricane coming through and doing some damage, and think about COVID-19 has been around for, I think, about 7 or 8 months now, and it's going stronger than it was before. So the length of the disruption is much longer. The length is also unknown. We don't know if it's going to be 10 months, a year and a half, 16 months. The length is unknown, and we go through waves. So again, that causes uncertainty and more more problems for suppliers and manufacturers and warehouses and so on and so forth. It also simultaneously impacts various geographic areas on the globe. So unlike a hurricane that may hit South Florida, this could be hitting, obviously many, many locations at the same time. One last thing that stands out is that usually when we go through a disruption, we are losing supply. We may lose a supplier here or there for a few days or a few weeks or whatever the case may be, because of a fire, because of a war, because of all those things that we mentioned earlier. But in this case, we are not only losing supply, but the demand is also changing quite a bit. So for certain products like PPE, as the example shows here, the demand, there was a study done that showed that a single positive COVID-19 case caused demand for PPE in that area to go up 17-fold. There is also examples of situations where demand would go down. For example, demand for oil has gone down, okay? Demand for many services, hotels, airlines, so on and so forth has gone down. So supply usually has gone down, but demand is the one that was unchanged before during usual, basically, disruptions. But in this one, we are seeing both major increases and major decreases, okay, which makes the situation a lot worse. Now, think about when PPE demand becomes 17-fold higher, just essentially overnight. Remember what that does to the upstream supply chain. We call that bullwhip effect. So those of you in the area, you know what that is. As we go up the supply chain, the variation increases further. So if it's 17-fold at the first stage, it could be 30 times more at the second stage, so on and so forth. So for the upstream suppliers, that even causes bigger variations. A survey that was done after COVID-19, that's the second quarter 2020, surveyed senior supply chain executives, and they looked at various industries and geographic areas and asked them what the impact of pandemic was on their supply chains. So I summarized the finding into 3 things here. Essentially, 3/4 of them encountered problems in their supplier base, which is something we're going to focus on, or faced problems with production and distribution. And more importantly, more than 9 out of 10 plan to increase their supply chain resiliency. They felt their supply chain was not resilient enough. In other words, it took a longer time to go back to the original state. They were basically, supply chain was slow to adapt to the change. Overall, we could certainly say supply chains were generally not resilient. Again, that's the ability to recover quickly and effectively from the disruption. Now, these are the reasons why. We've talked about the first one already. Most supply chain networks are designed for efficiency. I will comment a little bit more about that. There has been trucking and port bottlenecks, sick workers not showing up, export bans by other countries. That has been a major impact on certain products, or let's say pharmaceuticals, where a large portion of the raw material comes from, as you will see later, from China or India. Panic buying us rushing to supermarkets and buying things when we don't really need it, or buying more than what we need, and so on and so forth, obviously causes more havoc, causes more, causes the bullwhip effect to be stronger. Over-reliance on offshore manufacturing has been cited extensively. I'll comment about that in the next slide. Lack of transparency to assess existing supply. So sometimes we don't know what we have and where we have it. There has definitely been poor alignment and coordination among federal and state government agencies, particularly for critical products such as medical, healthcare, pharmaceuticals, so on and so forth. And the last point is, one of the problems with resiliency, which all of us all of a sudden want to have more of, is it's tough to measure it. There's no simple metric that's out there that can help us out. Whereas, for example, when it comes to efficiency or cost, it's a lot easier to, look at the dollar amounts and say, okay, this is cheaper than that, so we like that more. For colleagues of mine who are here, I would say measuring supply chain resilience has been extremely challenging, a great area of research. And there's a couple of papers that I can point you to, one at the European Journal of Operational Research, one at Computers and Computers and Industrial Engineering that are in the references. And the EJOR one is only a couple of weeks old. All right, so the resulting turmoil generated many calls for reshoring production. I would say that was the most common one that you would read once you read what's out there. And I would say that is no panacea, given the desire to serve other huge markets. We got all these multinationals who are also trying to serve the Asian market, the Chinese market, the European market, so on and so forth. So them pulling out of those areas is not something they want, because they're also selling in those areas. So that's one of the issues. Another issue that really stands out is China is sole source for thousands of items. So reducing dependency will take substantial time and investment. And in certain industries, we need really like the government's help to do that, because no single company is going to have enough power to do that on their own, or it's not in their self-interest to do so, because they would think, well, somebody else should bring it in the US, why should it be me? So on and so forth. So for example, 80% of all face masks are manufactured in China, okay, which was kind of shocking to me when I saw that. For certain drugs, 80 to 90% of active pharmaceutical ingredients, these are raw material, are produced either in China or India, okay? So bottom line is, yes, there has to be some reshoring, but it is a tall order. This is not something that's going to happen overnight, and it may not be in the self-interest of many of the players. So this brings me to this kind of framework. I saw that, I really liked it. It was done by Bain and Company a couple of months ago. Essentially, on one axis, we have supply chain resilience, so it could be high to low or low to high. And on one axis, we have supply chain risk exposure. The point of this framework is one size essentially doesn't fit all, okay? So for example, if your risk exposure, if you're in an industry or you're a company whose risk exposure is low, why would that be? Because most of your suppliers are local, because you carry a lot of inventory or something of that sort, or you've done a lot of process improvements and blah, blah, blah. So if you're in that situation, then you don't want your supply chain resilience to be high. You don't want to spend more money to make your supply chain more resilient. Why? Because you're going to end up with an unprofitable supply chain. Your costs are going to be higher than your competitors. The flip side of that is you may be very high exposure. So you're going to be up here and your supply chain is not resilient. So in a situation like that, obviously you're going to have vulnerable supply chains. You're going to be very vulnerable. So the point is you don't want to be positioned below this line and above that line. You want to be between two lines that is called appropriately resilient supply chain. Bottom line, one size is not going to fit all. So there's certain companies that may be here, others that may be there, others that may be up here, so on and so forth. So there's no one way of dealing with this. And it also shows that we do have a trade-off between cost and resilience. Now, going to our recommended strategies, and I'm almost half an hour here, so I better be quick here. Recommended strategies to mitigate supply chain disruption. So the paper that I was telling you about is with Diego Nossetti and Luciana Echazu and Dr. Blutinger, who's an emergency doctor at Cedars-Sinai in New York City. Has been accepted in Supply Chain Quarterly, and we are writing a draft. It's going to be published soon. So many of these ideas came from that. So the first one would be mapping and monitoring supply network. So you want to identify the location of tier 1 and tier 2. Now, some people say tier 3. Well, of course, it's easily said, but you're dealing with more and more suppliers. You want to examine inbound and outbound product flows, identify potential bottlenecks or choke points, monitor suppliers, and qualify alternative suppliers for critical components. Just to quickly show you this, and some of you who've taken some of our classes probably have seen this exact thing here. So here I'm showing you a very short supply chain. We only got 3 suppliers. Those are in yellow. And then, of course, they have procurement lead times, they have transportation lead times. Then the green rectangles are our processing. So those are what we own, not the supplier owns, and so on and so forth. And without going through a great deal of detail, because we could be talking about this for half an hour, just realize that when we have this shaded area, that means we are carrying inventory. So in this particular case, we are keeping safety stocks of finished goods, which, by the way, it's the most expensive. So for example, in this case, cost of goods sold for this part 1, which is our finished goods that we sell to our customers, is $440. Whereas, for example, this item, this raw material is only $2. This is $12. This is $180, so on and so forth. So as we move from left to right, our cost is going up. So the only point I want to make here is that this is the flow. We have mapped our supply chain, but now imagine if you have thousands of these boxes, okay? So it's easy said than done, obviously. So my second, our second recommendation is build redundancy in the supply chain. Redundancy, I must say, is counterintuitive for most supply chain professionals. I'm sure a lot of the folks that are working in this area would agree with that. It is not commonly an integral part of sourcing process. And the reason for that is we are so focused on efficiency. A lot of our incentives are to reduce cost or have efficiency improvements. So if we want people to build the redundancy, redundancy would be having another supplier or keeping more inventory, lots of things, having more capacity. Of course, none of those are free. So we somehow need to give incentive to those folks to actually do this. And of course, that's a tall order by itself. Another one that I think it's actually not that hard to do is strategic positioning of safety stocks. So when we say increase safety stocks, a lot of people think, well, we are talking about safety stocks all over the place. Well, obviously that's one size fits all. We don't want to do that. We want to put it where it makes the most sense. So we want to provide more resiliency without incurring a lot of costs. And I show you an example of that. So imagine where the safety stocks are is towards the end of the chain, which happens to be more expensive and all that. Now we are pushing this back. So for example, I am keeping safety stock of this $2 item. I'm keeping safety stock of this $12 item. And of course, there is dependencies between these safety stocks. So if I keep some safety stocks here and here, I need less of the expensive stuff there, okay? And so on and so forth. So we could analyze this and come up with strategic locations to keep safety stocks where it's not going to cost us a ton, but it's going to make supply chain a lot more resilient. Notice that just this amount of safety stock here is our procurement lead time was 58 days here. Right? So once we keep safety stocks here, we are skipping that. We are cutting that out. So we got procurement lead times, 7 days, 37 days, 58 days. We have transportation lead times, 28, 3, and 3. So for example, this one goes on a boat. Okay, so it's 4 weeks. And then we have manufacturing or processing lead times of our own, 5 days here, 15 days here, so on and so forth. A lot more on this slide, but I just wanted to give you an idea that strategic positioning of safety stocks, or sometimes it's called smart buffering, rather than across the board keeping safety stocks across the board, which is obviously an overkill, can lead to a more resilient supply chain without increasing the cost much. So it's a smart thing to do. The third idea is to come up with a diversify supply base. So global suppliers from multiple regions, maybe at least 2 regions or something, not all from the same country or same region. Ideally, at least one based in US, especially if it's a critical item. So that may not be for all items, but certain critical items to protect against border closures, for example. A holistic view of inventory so that we optimize globally and avoid having excess in some regions while shortages in other regions. And of course, we can also recommend a hybrid approach for essential products. Buyers carry in-house inventory on a just-in-time basis. So they're not going to carry any excess inventory. Why? Because they are relying on suppliers and manufacturers that are actually holding safety stocks and reserve capacity for surge. Okay, so those are all little smart things that can be done in certain situations. Now, you may not be able to do all of them, but you kind of pick and choose, and for certain products, certain strategies may make more sense. For others products, it may not. Achieve network agility, setting up alternative manufacturing sites and assembly nodes. Again, the key here is to develop a tailored solution for each segment of the supply chain. One size does not fit all. Validate the demand for constrained resources. This may be a tough one. You're trying to avoid gaming by players, not sending distorted demand signals, which causes bullwhip effect. Okay, so say, for example, if I need 10 ventilators, I may say, well, I need 100. Why? Because I think they're going to send 1/10 of what I ask. Okay, so on and so forth. So this goes back to alignment issues. It's more of a behavioral type of a topic, and we have courses to cover that as well. Finally, employing technology solutions can improve supply chain resiliency at low cost. So these are some ideas that we can get resiliency again by not paying a huge price. So here I'm talking about what's referred to as Industry 4.0 technologies, and I will mention quite a few. So for example, cross-entity collaboration by utilizing cloud-based collaborative platforms for sharing information. That's there's a case on that by P&G, Procter & Gamble. Real-time network visibility solutions to integrate data across entire supply chain. So that uses the 5G technology and blockchain. Supplier monitoring, that's something we just talked about. We talked about monitor this, map and monitor suppliers. Well, artificial intelligence could help us do that at a lower cost than we had to do before. Advanced analytics to make good decisions quickly. So for example, prepare contingency plans quickly, relocate inventory from one warehouse to another warehouse quickly. Again, P&G is doing a great job on that. Utilizing additive manufacturing, or what's called 3D printing, to make products. That's especially helpful for spare parts and you know, items at low volume. Finally, developing a database to identify components that are supplied by one manufacturer and are difficult to replace. So that was just a database that was developed by Toyota. Okay, so we do have a course again. I'm putting the plug here for our MS in Supply Chain program that covers these topics, and I'll point it out to you in a few minutes. Finally, additional recommendations for essential industries, such as healthcare, such as pharmaceuticals, such as defense. Okay, and the first one is government involvement to ensure resilient supply chains. So similar to the 2008 financial crisis, where US government instituted a stress test for banks, maybe essential supply chains should pass a stress test. And then we may realize, okay, well, this type of product, this type of raw material should be made in the US, and government should be involved to make sure that's done, rather than just rely on the free market, because each company, it may not be to their benefit to do that, but it's very beneficial to the country. Again, I'm sure Luciana and Diego could do a better job at explaining that. Let's see, better alignment, coordination among federal and state government agencies. Again, there was certainly state governments were turned into rivals. They were competing for the same constrained supplies, and that caused the prices to go up for certain PPEs and so on and so forth. And of course, better transparency of strategic national stockpile. So those are very specific. Now, the reason I have this slide is just to show you that it depends on your industry. So for example, these three are going to be applied to more essential industries, and so on and so forth. So what are the key lessons? And I may finish this in time to get a question or two. What's interesting is pandemics happen routinely. I think we've had 3 of them in the last 100 years, and maybe 10 of them in the last 300, something like that. They just happen far enough apart for each generation of leaders to figure it's not going to happen on the watch. Okay. And of course, it's a tough situation. I mean, nobody can predict this, but we weren't prepared for sure. Or the world, was not either. We have a need to rethink new ways of managing global supply chains to improve resiliency without having too much cost. So I think that's the key issue. Yes, you can make any supply chain very resilient, but at what cost? And that's why the answer to that question is going to vary from industry to industry, company to company. Um, so we need to find a tailored approach for each industry or even each product line. Striking a balance between cost and resiliency is the key challenge, as I mentioned before. And of course, I really like that strategic positioning of safety stocks that can lead into more resilient supply chain without going through a lot of cost. Certainly, employing technology solutions can improve supply chain resiliency at low cost or maybe lower cost. And finally, I like to say, never let a good crisis go to waste. That was a quotation from Winston Churchill. And, you know, sometimes things like this, tragic things like this should happen for us to kind of wake up and change our ways, because it probably will happen again, obviously. Selected references and recommended readings. I just want to, the one article for my colleagues, I mentioned the EJOR is right here. And I make sure that these are sent to you. I think Josh will send these slides to you. And the other one is right here, computers and industrial engineering. Those are for resilience metrics. And then, of course, a lot more to talk about and read. As usual, I'm going to end with this. So going back to our program, one could ask me, well, what types of courses are out there to kind of cover some of the material that I just presented to you? And I would say, in this program, you got 30 credits, you got 11 courses, 9 of them are 3 credits, 2 of them are 1.5 credits. So that's why it adds up to 30. And I would say you have a course called Global Supply Chain Management. Certainly a lot of the topics I covered here, such as bullwhip effect, risk pooling, safety stocks, and so on and so forth, is covered there. We have a separate sourcing course, supply management strategy and analysis. We talked a lot about sourcing here, and that there's an entire course on that. We did talk about some logistics issues. So we have a course on that. And for the technology solutions, we have a course called Applied Data Analytics that covers many of those technologies. And then, of course, here we got 3 courses here that are more behavioral. Remember, I mentioned alignment, this supply chain alignment or supply chain misalignment causes a lot of issues, and some of those are covered in these courses, in addition to lots more, of course, negotiations, relationship management, so on and so forth. Industrial organization in the supply chain, that's the course that I know Luciana has taught, and she did a great job at that. That's essentially game theory. And then we have a quality management and process improvement course, which, you know, mapping the process improvement, statistical process control is all covered there. Decision analysis and supply chain modeling covers essentially operations research or management science techniques that could be very helpful, optimization tools. And finally, we have a capstone course called Advanced Topics in Supply Chain Management, involving a very big simulation, very hands-on, and that's why we call it the capstone course. I'm going to turn it over to Josh.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Farzad, and we'll be back with you in just a moment for questions. I've been monitoring some of the questions coming in. Thank you, Farzad, for talking about the last piece regarding the courses, but also in how it's connected to everything that we've learned here tonight, and the way that the curriculum is integrated in that way, in the systems view approach the hallmark of how we approach supply chain management education. The last thing that I like to just really quickly mention about, you know, our master's degree is about 3 things. the accessibility of it, the flexibility of it, and that it's efficient. We operate on a quarter-based system in our MS and supply chain program. So for those of you that are working professionals thinking, wow, how would I learn all of these things that Farzad has talked about tonight and be a working professional? Well, they're 10-week quarters, and we align these quarters to be designed for live interaction in the evenings, but flexible enough in that you can enroll, you could take time off, you can go to one course, two courses. We want to make sure that we have built a program and the curriculum in supply chain around your needs, not you make it work for the program. So the program is very flexible and designed in that way. As far as admissions requirements, again, related to the access piece, we want to make sure that those that have working experience, especially in supply chain or any professional field, and they're looking to make a change perhaps to supply chain, or those that are interested in this field, is that we acknowledge the working professional, the years of experiences, all of the things that you've accomplished as a working professional is part of how we evaluate not only admissions, but in terms of the level of merit award and how we collaboratively support you if you are interested in pursuing advanced coursework in supply chain management. Finally, our program is very succinct. We have multiple offerings of courses in a calendar year. We have the way that we approach our quarter-based system is in such that you could complete it on par or even faster with some residential programs. So we really pride ourselves not only in terms of the curriculum and this exciting program that we put together, building upon the successes and all the work in supply chain, but doing it in a way that is very flexible for you, but also very efficient. And that's something that's very important to us. So that includes things like waiving exams and acknowledging all of those experiences to be something that you would be able to use those things. And also it enriches our experiences as well, the faculty and staff, by you sharing all of your experiences that you have professionally in the classroom. So as we're learning things, and some of the comments that I've been reading throughout the course of the seminar really emphasize and kind of reiterate that when we're learning the curriculum, we're identifying and we're talking through these concepts, many of you have experienced them in some way, shape, or form. And that's part of the learning experience in these types of programs and these types of environments. So that's really a very important, critical part of these programs. So now what I'd like to do is turn this back to a little bit of a Q&A session with Dr. Mahmoudi. So I'm going to scroll back up to the top. And again, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, you feel free to type them into the chat. And if we don't have time to get to them, we do have 8 minutes left. If we don't have time to get to them, we certainly will try to address them in another way so that you have your questions answered. So Farzad, I'm just going to kind of go through in order and ask these questions that have come in and see how we want to answer these. I do know, given the volume, unfortunately we can't unmute everybody. So if others that might have their own thoughts or comments about this, you're certainly welcome to engage in that conversation. But the first question that came in is, do you think that after the pandemic is over and that consumers will be less likely to purchase Chinese-made goods and prefer made in the USA goods?
Well, that's a hard question to answer, but I would say, we complain about the Chinese goods, but then we also buy them. You know what I'm saying? I mean, we like to have the cake and eat it too. And it's not things that are completely manufactured in China or anywhere else. I'm not trying to pick on China in particular, but a lot of the products that we buy happen to be cheaper because they have Chinese or Indian or South American or European components in them. So a lot of times you may not even realize that may be the case, so on and so forth. So I think that's a tough one. I don't think, now there's going to be certain products that I think if it says made in America, maybe there's going to be a, buzz, or that there's going to be some advantage there among certain groups of people. But I think at the end of the day, we need to be competitive, and that's what really counts.
Great, thank you.
One other comment before you answer, ask the next question. I just want folks we are in a kind of an unusual situation where you guys can talk and you just hear things. In our live sessions, that's not the case. And we put a maximum of 20 students in each class just to make sure we get a lot of interaction. Okay, go ahead, Josh.
Great, thank you. Next question is, will the international supply chain figure in the distribution of the COVID vaccine?
Say that again, one more time, please.
Sure. So the question was, do you think that the international supply chain will figure in the distribution of the COVID vaccine?
Yeah, I mean, we are all waiting for a good vaccine, and hopefully it's going to be soon. But I think once we have it, it's a matter of, producing enough doses and basically, making sure people that need it will have it. So hopefully just as an example, where there has been a, tornado or a natural disaster. For example, Walmart has used its supply chain to provide aid to that area. And they've done a great job, and they've gotten a lot of good PR because of that, even though they don't usually get good PR, but that's one thing they've done effectively. So I'm hoping things like that will happen more and more with the vaccine as well.
Absolutely. Let's see, the next question, some of these are questions and comments, so I think it kind of leads up to the questions. After 9 months, why is it that we do not have a supplier of non-woven gear for the coronavirus workers? There were 40 non-woven suppliers in PA, MA, and New York in 1990. This person sold adhesives in the industry for BF Goodrich. What happened? So I guess the question is, what happened in terms of suppliers for non-woven gear for coronavirus workers? I don't know, that might be too specific, or if that was more of a general comment.
I assume you're talking about a critical item there, right?
Yeah.
A critical item, as I mentioned, there are many critical raw materials for pharmaceuticals where 80 to 90% is produced in either China or India in that case. So similar things like that has happened. And of course, see, that's why we had that recommendation about government involvement, because somebody has to look at the whole picture for at least critical items. I'm not talking all items, but for critical items, because of national security concerns or health concerns, for those we need more of a national policy.
Absolutely. Okay, next question. In an effort to de-risk the supply chain, I apologize. I think people are typing in, so it resets my where I'm at. Okay, in an effort to de-risk the supply chain, would developing financial models that show the cost of supply chain challenges like stockouts or failure of single source supply be the best way to justify potential increases in operational expenditures?
Absolutely. So in other words, that's what I was trying to insinuate when I said we need to have the right metrics, because if your metric is just minimize cost, then you're not going to be thinking about making, you have no incentive to make supply chains more resilient. And most of the time when nothing is happening, everything is normal, people are going to look at you and say, well, why are your costs so high? So somehow we need to make that trade-off. And it's not an easy one. It is certainly not an ezy one. And that's why and most measures I found on resiliency of supply chain is, multi-criteria is very complicated. It's not something that most companies could use easily.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a great point. So in other words, one way to say, one way to justify making supply chains more resilient or less risky is to, figure out what your losses are going to be when something bad happens, something unusual happens. Yeah.
Next question, actually, there was a couple of questions, a couple of folks that were reiterating this question, so I want to make sure we ask this. So the question is, Fortune 100 companies have highly skilled employees and deep resources available to quickly learn and adapt to disruptions like COVID. What about smaller companies, regional or family-run businesses? How do they respond or adopt?
Yes. And of course, they have a lot more pressure on them. Studies have shown that large companies large US companies have done extremely well. Even in periods where we think, things haven't been all that great. But the smaller companies are the ones that get the pressure. So, it's like the larger company would say, well, I don't want to carry this inventory, but I'm going to push you to carry that inventory for me. That may not be good for supply chain, but it's good for them. You see what I'm saying? So it becomes a win-loss situation, and that's a real tough one because we have enough misalignments within one company's supply chain. Marketing says this, supply chain says that, manufacturing says something else, finance, and that's a situation where we have the same CEO, we have the same CFO, and so on and so forth. But now once you go through, the entire supply chain, or at least a portion of supply chain, you're dealing with multiple companies, with multiple CEOs, with multiple CFOs, and that alignment is going to be a lot harder to reach. So yeah, I guess I just want to add that there was a interesting article in Harvard Business Review that actually not addressed, but brought that problem up. That right now in the US, the problem is not the large companies, it's the problem are those smaller family-owned companies that are not surviving, and they're creating a gap in the infrastructure of the company. How you fix that, that's a tougher one. Maybe our economists could help me out there. Yeah.
Well, I do want to be mindful that it is 8:02. There is certainly still several questions here. So as far as that, I'll leave it up to you. We could certainly ask a few more. There's still plenty of folks here maybe waiting to hear the answers to some more questions.
I'm available, sure.
Okay,
sure.
perfect. So let's keep going. I'm really enjoying this.
Another maybe 10 minutes or so.
Oh, perfect. All right. So the next question is, what technology solutions, again, I'm sorry, just bounced me out again. I appreciate all these questions coming in. It's great. What technology solutions are companies utilizing to map their supply chains? I have used, I'm going to probably say this wrong, Analogous and Tableau in the past, but what are some of the other useful technologies?
Artificial intelligence is mentioned as one, but I don't know specific packages. I'm sure people in the audience would be able to answer that question. So I can't really be very specific on that.
I did want to just mention some of the follow-up comments about small business resiliency. We have somebody who responded and said, speaking from a Fortune 100 company, we lean on you guys, the smaller businesses, with your creativity and grit in our time of need. My company turned to a local distillery to source all hand sanitizer for our North American sites from a distillery just down the road. So that's a really interesting point that was made there about the ways to collaborate and coordinate efforts, it's really nice to see that. So thank you for sharing that. The next question.
In the times of need, we do see more and more of that, which is, again, like you said, nice to see.
Absolutely. Next question here is, how does the supply chain incentivize a supplier to carry the warehousing costs associated with maintaining safety stocks for essential items when the demand isn't consistent enough to justify it, especially in smaller companies?
Yes, exactly. So when I say push inventory back, that's exactly what basically happens. Now, hopefully it doesn't always fall on the smaller companies, but somehow we need to optimize the entire supply chain. And that's why our program focuses more on collaboration and looking at the whole picture rather than optimizing your own little stage or area. But again, that requires a lot of collaboration. Yeah, somebody has to hold that bag, and when there's no time for it or need for it, when there's no need for it, then people are gonna wonder, well, why are you keeping all this? Why are we paying for this? But somehow there has to be cost sharing. So in other words, if somebody back in the supply chain or up in the supply chain is carrying inventory in case of a problem, then they're going to have to get some higher prices down the line to cover that cost. Otherwise, it's good for the downstream companies because they got that inventory to rely on, but then they're not paying for it. So again, this all goes back to supply chain misalignment. And I know I am not giving very, specific answers here, but these are what we've talked about for years in our executive seminars. These are tough ones. And there is no formula, but somehow we got to collaborate for example, companies like Walmart who were at least known for being very cutthroat and so on and so forth with their suppliers, even they understand that the suppliers got to survive. So they got to back off sometimes because they're going to end up with no suppliers after a while or not many suppliers. So these things will work itself out sometimes in the long term, but then it could take a long time.
Great. Let's see. The next question is really related to government control is what I would kind of interpret this as. There was an example of a Connecticut mask supplier who geared up for the swine flu and purchased a huge amount of machines to make the masks. And when the situation ended, the government went out for bids and over 500 workers were let go, and he sold out of his equipment. So I guess the question really is, do you feel that the government will maintain domestic production in the future for some of these types of supplies related to pandemics and so on?
We would certainly hope so. Again, what matters is focusing on the real critical items, because we don't want government involved in every single product. That wouldn't be good, obviously. But in certain ones, they really need to do that. Now, whether they do or not, I don't know. That's kind of the hope, because each company looking at its benefits their own benefits may not really, we're going to sub-optimize. We're not going to come up with a global optimization so for certain things, because of national security reasons or, health reasons, something that's very critical, there needs to be some coordination and centralization. I thought about something else to that misalignment question. One of the things some companies are doing is sharing information with their supply chain partners. So even if they're not paying for things, like you're keeping inventory for me, so here's the check for that, they're at least providing information, giving heads up to companies down, in the upstream in the supply chain. So that alone could be very helpful, because in most cases, we don't even see that. We don't see sharing of information, no collaboration whatsoever. And I think now we have some of the technology to support that, whereas maybe 20 years ago, 10 years ago, we didn't, it's become easier to at least help other suppliers, your supply chain network you at least have the opportunity or can collaborate if you wanted to easier.
All right. Well, I think we have a lot of you might want to go through this on your own, Farzad. There's a lot of great discussions here, not necessarily questions. So I think I'll end it there. One more question, just in time. Good timing. We'll take one more question. I think we'll wrap this up. But again, thank you so much to everyone for coming. This has been a great learning experience and opportunity for a lot of people who have been right in the thick of all of this to be able to kind of share and learn and share some, give us some of their examples, but also learn from each other and hear this. So the last question here, and then we'll wrap this up, is do any of the strategies you've discussed change for governments, specifically when supporting the strategic national stockpile or similar programs like that?
Would it change?
Yeah. So, do any of the strategies that you've discussed this evening would any of them change for governments, or do you think that they would apply to governments as well as the private?
I would say the government ones was these three, and I think the last comment was there was a lot. I read a lot of reports about people not knowing what was available at the strategic national stockpile, what was available, what was not available. So that information was not transparent. And of course, government has a reason for that, and that is it's secretive what you have in there. So you don't want to make that transparent too early. But during the pandemic, the suggestion was during a pandemic, they should. And they don't keep it a secret, because that's just going to hinder the processes and not help it as much.
Farzad, if you wouldn't mind going back to our contact information slide, just to kind of wrap this up, and we'll be sending out links to the video as well as the slides themselves. But as you process all this information and think about its fit with your, with your experiences, you might be some colleagues or yourself or anyone that might be thinking more about next steps for formal education and supply chain, or to follow up on this. For those of you that are alumni and professionals in the field, here's our contact information. You can reach out to me if you wanted to talk further about the programs, or what it might look like. What does it take to get into the MS and supply chain? All of those types of things. Our team stands ready to support anyone that wants to ask questions or just would like to further discuss. And of course, Dr. Farzad Mahmoodi's contact information is there below for anyone that is interested in contacting him about his slides, about the work that he's doing, the research, or anything related to our supply chain management programs. We're both more than happy to respond and assist and schedule additional times to talk. So, Dr. Mahmoodi, thank you so much for sharing of your time this evening.
One last thing, just one more thing for the prospective students to know. For example, Josh got a whole bunch of stories, case studies that he was reading to us, and he has more. Imagine if you were in a class and you had classmates, because that's what actually happens. You have a question, I'm not the only one answering it, but they learn from each other as well. That's what was lacking, tonight, because of the large group and everything. But those are also very nice add-ons that one could have once you're in an interactive class.
Right. Absolutely. No, that's very well said. And this is an example of, with a class, the types of conversations, the type of examples that you'd be able to have, whether it's in Dr. Mahmoodi's supply chain class or any of the classes within the program. Every one of them will have that live interaction where we really bring everything to life, not only the concepts and the theories and the examples and practices, but also people's work experiences, which is a hallmark of some of our online programs. So again, thank you so much to everyone for coming, and thank you, Dr. Mahmoodi, for your time, your expertise, and your commitment to supply chain management. We're very grateful. So I will go ahead and formally end this evening. I will stop the recording, and we will be doing a follow-up email with the information about everything that's talked about tonight. Again, thank you so much for coming. Have a wonderful evening. And on behalf of the Ray School of Business, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay. Take care.